Right, thanks everyone for joining us tonight for our Zoom event with Canadian mystery author Owen Laukkanen, the creator of both the Stevens and Windermere series, the Nia Bay series, 2 standalone novels for adults, and 2 novels for young adults. His first novel, The Professionals, was a finalist for the Anthony Award for Best First Novel at BoucherCon, the World Mystery Convention. And in addition to writing novels, Owen is also very involved with Rain Coast Dog Rescue, a dedicated nonprofit animal rescue organization in Vancouver, Canada. Just a reminder that this program is being recorded and I will have it posted in the next few days on our library website. Please feel free to ask questions throughout. We just ask that you stay muted when you are not asking a question. So at this time, we welcome Owen Laukkanen.
Well, thanks so much, Stacy. And thanks everyone for being here. It's I can always tell I'm in Minnesota when people pronounce my last name correctly. I've come to Minnesota a few times for book events, and sometimes people just show up because they see it's a Finnish last name, and I understand there's a lot of Finnish folk in Minnesota. So it's wonderful to be back, even virtually. I have kind of an accidental Minnesota connection in that my first 6 books were set in and around the Twin Cities, which was something that I didn't aim to do. When I wrote my first novel, The Professionals, I had no real connection to Minnesota whatsoever, and just happened to send my bad guys to Minnesota, where I needed kind of law enforcement to pick up the trail, and so the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension picked up the trail on these bad guys and chased them around the country. And by the end of the book, I showed it to a publisher who said, we'd love to do a series about these BCA agents set in Minnesota, and are you interested? And I said, well, geez, I've never been really to the Twin Cities at all. I don't know much about Minnesota, except my family is from Thunder Bay, so just the other side of Lake Superior. And I feel like maybe there's some similarities between northern Minnesota and northern Ontario, but I certainly wasn't going to say no to book deal, even if it meant kind of having to learn very quickly about Minnesota and about the Twin Cities. And it was really kind of a life blessing for me, because it meant that I got to take these tax deductible trips to Minneapolis and St. Paul. And I remember on my first one, I met a writing group from the Twin Cities who found out that I was coming and had a big barbecue for me and showed me around, and hooked me up with a ride along with a Minneapolis police officer, and just really welcomed me. And I've had, opportunities to return so many times. I've made lifelong friends of the writing community and the reading community in Minnesota. I've come back to the bookstore Once Upon a Crime in Minneapolis a number of times. They've had me on tour, and I've absolutely loved their first owners, Pat and Gary, who sold the place after Gary passed away, and the new ownership have all welcomed me, and we've had some wonderful events there. So I'm always so grateful to get to go back to Minnesota. I always feel so lucky that I just accidentally happened to set a book there that happened to kind of set my career on the course that it did. And even if I can't be in Lake City in person, I'm so glad to, I feel like now when I'm back in Minnesota that I'm around kind of friends. So I'm so grateful to be back. I wish that I was there to eat some tater tots, because when I stop in, that's tater tots and good beer are what I look forward to on my book tours through Minnesota. But I'll find some here and have some in Minnesota's honor. But anyway, thanks so much for having me. I'm not really one for kind of, standing at a podium and lecturing folks about my life and career. I can do that if we like, but I am also happy to kind of take this as a conversation, as a back and forth, and talk about, my journey, my writing, my books, my love of small town public libraries, which is my sister-in-law's a librarian, and some of my best friends are librarians, and so libraries and librarians hold a special place in my heart too. And we could also talk about my career in dog rescue. I'm actually broadcasting right now from a bankrupt helicopter facility at Vancouver Airport, which on February 1st was filled with 300 rescue dogs and cats from Afghanistan. And I've been living here since then in this kind of nondescript industrial space. There's dog kennels on this wall, there's dog kennels on that wall. I'm taking care of them as we try to find them homes. You can't hear them now because it's their nap time, but generally the sound and the smell is it's a bit overwhelming. We started with about, as I said, 300 animals, and we're down to about 50 now. So 250 of them have found homes. And it's been my job to take care of them, which I've done I've been working 16 to 18-hour days on this site, 7 days a week since the beginning of February. So my writing career has kind of taken a back seat right now. My sleep schedule has taken a back seat, but it's been a really fulfilling side of things. And you had better believe that there are at least 1 or 2 books coming out of this. So
I was just going to say that. I think that can be woven into a couple of books.
I think so. My first one will be called Rebellion in the Cattery, because I'm a dog person. If you've read some of my books, there's dogs featured, but we had 140 cats here, and the cat environment is much different than the dog environment. And so, kind of, I go in there with trepidation because, sometimes these cats can sense that you're a dog person, but yeah, we've made do. We've come to an understanding. But so that's my life right now. That's why you have this blank wall behind me, as opposed to I've been to my apartment once for 20 minutes since the end of January. So this is what I'm doing. But
well, and I don't know if because I didn't put anything like in the materials, the marketing materials that I put together for tonight. I don't think I put anything in there about like how you even started writing, like how you jumped in. Some people might be kind of curious.
Sure.
About that.
Yeah. I mean, I was always someone who thought that I wasn't creative enough when I was a kid. I remember in grade school, we had to do kind of young authors projects where you had to write a book. And I remember thinking, well, this is just not for me. I'm very much into math and science, and I would say left-brained to write. But I did grow up reading voraciously. I was one of those people who my family's picture was posted in the library as, do not lend more books until they pay their fines, because my parents would take out, 30 books for me and my brothers, and we'd read them and invariably lose them and invariably just never bring them back. And but we were just voracious readers and read, I think probably in all of our days, there was no young adult fiction. So we all probably grew up stealing the adult books or the more mature books from our parents' shelves. And so me and my brothers grew up that way, reading voraciously. And then in high school, I really started to write and to want to kind of express myself creatively. I remember reading Cannery Row by John Steinbeck and just being so inspired by what he evoked with language and what he evoked in me. I grew up with a family of fishermen and then moved to Ontario and was landlocked, and reading Steinbeck's kind of descriptions of the tuna fleets going out to sea really spoke to me. And I wanted to be able to go to those places myself through writing. And so I started writing in high school and won a few writing contests. I had some really, really supportive teachers. And then I went to university to become a veterinarian. I don't know if you can hear the dogs, but they're picking up now. They're out in the hallway. I went to school to become a veterinarian and quickly realized that I didn't care much for chemistry, and I was getting much more fun out of the English classes I was taking as electives and the creative writing classes. So I applied to a creative writing program up here in Vancouver, got in and switched majors I decided that if I got into this program, it was meant to be that I would be a writer, and I would just become a writer who had a dog as opposed to a veterinarian. And lo and behold, I got in. So I wound up with a fine arts degree as opposed to a doctorate of veterinary medicine, much to my parents' worry and dismay. And from there, I went on a kind of weird sojourn where I answered a Craigslist ad and became a professional poker journalist. And so I traveled the world for 3 years going to professional poker tournaments and writing about them for a shadowy Swedish online poker company. And after having traveled the world for 3 years and seen every casino I wanted to see, I had a bunch of money saved up. So I thought I would give fiction writing a try, which was my my goal from the beginning. And so I left the poker business, moved back in with my mother, which was undoubtedly her long fear. She supported me as the money ran out, and I just wrote as much as I possibly could. And the second book that I wrote while I was staying with my mom was The Professionals, which kind of within a year of me moving back in with my mom, I had found an agent and found a New York publisher who was, like I say, willing to give me a book deal to write more books about these Minnesota detectives, and that continued for 6 books. And then I published kind of a standalone. I published some young adult fiction, and then I moved into I moved away from that series and into kind of the Nia Bay books and a few more kind of diversionary projects. So it's been a long road. I think people ask me, or aspiring writers kind of ask about my journey and about what it would take to become a writer. And someone once said to me that if you can see yourself doing anything else in the world, happily do that instead of taking a career in the arts, because it'll be a grind and you really have to love it. And I think I've been one of those people who can't see myself doing anything else, and have been lucky enough to kind of land where I've landed and to have been able to make a career of it. But yeah, it's never been boring. It's been fun. It's been scary at times, but I feel so blessed. And honestly, doing this is one of the really kind of enjoyable parts for me. I know some writers, the myth of the writer is, or sometimes the truth of the writer is that they're just kind of isolated in a basement typing away at their computer, and they never want to be outside and meeting people. But for me, meeting readers and fellow creatives is such a joy, and something that I've missed during the pandemic. I've missed these library visits. I've missed being on tour. I've missed talking to readers about their books, because I got into this as a reader, and I think we're all here because we're passionate about books. And so that connection is one of the most rewarding things about this career for me. So thank you for giving that to me.
Owen, when you wrote The Professionals, and about Stevens and Windermere, did you realize that they were special? That when someone came back and said, "Hey, we want you to focus on more stories with these two," did you have a thought on that when you started?
To be honest, The Professionals I wrote with the bad guys as the good guys. If you've read The Professionals, it's about 4 kidnappers in their 20s, four college graduates in their 20s who can't find jobs after getting out of university, and so they become professional kidnappers. And it was kind of based on, it was based on friends of mine. I wrote it in 2009, which was just kind of at the tail end of the financial crisis, and I remember friends of mine being unable to find jobs, or having their banks go under, or was that time when Wall Street was kind of imploding, and certainly kind of for my age group, we were, I think, coming into the realization that just because we graduated with university degrees, we weren't going to be able to kind of live the lives that we'd expected. And so these 4 kind of 20 somethings were kind of the people who I related to most in the book. And I think it's apparent in the book. A lot of people who've read The Professionals talk about being able to relate to those bad guys. And so they were really the point of view characters. They were what I started with. I don't outline books. I don't begin with kind of an end in sight. I begin just with an idea and some characters and set them on their way. So I set these 4 bad guys on their way, and kind of randomly decided to set them in Chicago at the beginning of the book. And from Chicago, they needed a place to go. So they went north to Minnesota, where they kidnapped someone. They kidnapped a businessman from Minneapolis. And at that point, I needed law enforcement. And so I realized, okay, so the law enforcement who would be chasing them would be the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. So I created Kirk Stevens, and then I created Carla Windermere when they cross state lines, because she's an FBI agent, and the BCA would need FBI approval or FBI kind of to work with them. But Windermere in particular, when I was asked to write a series about Stevens and Windermere, I remember going back to Carla Windermere, because I think a lot of male writers fall into the trap of writing female characters as these kind of, the strong female character as written from a man is often this, kind of size zero, ninja who can fight off three assassins in a cocktail dress and heels while reciting kind of Japanese poetry, and that's not these kind of fantasy figures. And Windermere in the first was kind of a one-dimensional character, and I remember thinking, well, geez, I've spent a lot of time describing how attractive Windermere is, and I've not really given her much beyond the kind of the flat one-dimensional thing. So I was a bit worried going back to when I was asked to write a series about Stevens and Windermere. And a lot of the second book in the series was me trying to make Windermere more of a human being and more of a, someone with flaws, someone with, she's depressed. She's kind of struggles making connections with people. I've kind of dialed back the strong female character element of her. And so long story short, I had no idea that I would be writing about these characters more than, as a plot device to follow these characters, these kidnappers who were really based on my friends throughout one book. I expected The Professionals to be a standalone, and honestly, making Windermere into more of a three-dimensional character was such a rewarding part of the series, and she became the character I think that I related to most, and that I certainly kind of liked writing the most, because once I got over that beautiful ass-kicking FBI agent, I got into this really complex and to me kind of compelling human being. So
Yeah. Will there be any more Stevens and Windermere books beyond the 6? Do you
I
think?
hope so. I have plans for at least 2 more, and I always wanted to go back and write a sequel to The Professionals that was based on what happened to the kidnappers once it all ended. And I won't spoil anything as far as those who haven't read the book, but I think it'd be interesting to check in on them 10 years later and see just how this experience colored them, because I wrote the book when I was in my late 20s, and I think my perspective on things has changed. But so yeah, I would like to write more of the books. I think they didn't sell as well as the publisher would have liked. So publishing being a business, I think I'd like to find another publisher who'd like to do more. I think we've always had Hollywood interest in the books, and have had some good Hollywood interest lately. So I think if that were to come to fruition, then there'd be more interest in more books. But yeah, I definitely have more books plotted. I love the characters. I love having a reason to go back to Minnesota. And so, yeah, I'd like to write more in the series, definitely. So just kind of watch this space and cross your fingers that publishers will get on board with it.
I also read your story about, I wish I could remember the name of it, the dog, the Afghani vet.
Deception Cove.
Oh, Deception
Yes.
Cove.
Yes, thank you. Would you talk about that book?
Yes, I will. And actually, it's kind of ironic being in a rescue shelter with a bunch of dogs from Afghanistan, having written Deception Cove with no idea that this was coming. So Deception Cove kind of came about after the Stevens and Windermere series ran its course with that publisher. And I was kind of looking for something to rekindle my love of writing, because as much as I enjoyed writing Stevens and Windermere books, I think it was, when you're kind of writing a book a year for a publisher who's looking to kind of essentially make you part of a production line, it does do something to the creative process. So I wanted to write something that was just for me, that was just kind of maybe stylistically a bit different, that was something that just made me happy to write again. And I had adopted this dog, Lucy, who's a pit bull, a few years before. And I had never really wanted a pit bull, but my partner at the time did. And so we adopted a pit bull, as kind of partnership compromises go. And I fell in love with her right away. And one thing about adopting a pit bull is you become kind of very defensive of the breed and very defensive of the, kind of the bad rap that they get. And so I started getting pretty passionately involved. And I also became pretty passionate about these kind of positive change programs and programs where dogs, pit bulls in particular, go into prisons and help to rehabilitate prisoners who also help to train these dogs. And I thought, I mean, I'm all about kind of forgiveness and rehabilitation and this idea that these dogs have been given up on by society and these human beings have been given up on by society, spoke to me as a person and also as a writer, because I thought there'd be some interesting territory to mine. So I thought about having a convict train a dog like my Lucy, and then having the dog go out into the world and get into some trouble. And the prisoner, when he gets out, all he wants to do is make sure that the dog's okay. So that was kind of the germ of Deception Cove. And I'm also kind of passionate about mental health issues, particularly when it comes to, in one element, kind of veterans of war, who I think we're all probably aware are face so much hardship when they come back from deployment. And I think in a lot of ways, there's a lot of work to be done still to kind of to support veterans who come back from deployment with kind of mental health issues. And so the third piece of the puzzle for Deception Cove, besides Lucy and Mason Burke, who's the convict, is Jess, who's a U.S. Marine who was deployed in Afghanistan and comes back with PTSD and takes Lucy on as a companion dog. And it's through Jess that Lucy gets in trouble, and through that trouble that Mason kind of goes out to try to get Lucy out of trouble, and in the process kind of gets wound up with Jess. And so, I wanted to write a book. I'm a big fan of kind of the drifter novels that Lee Child, and in particular, my friend Nick Petrie writes the Peter Ash series of these kind of drifters who arrive in town, and the sheriff's corrupt, and there's a damsel in distress, and it's up to the drifter, it's up to Reacher to save the day. And I wanted to write something like that, where this guy Mason Burke kind of literally gets off a bus in small town Washington State and finds that the sheriff is corrupt, and there's a damsel in distress, but Mason has been in jail for 18 years. Or 15 years. He was 18 when he went in. He's not Jack Reacher. He's not this kind of, and the damsel in distress is a combat decorated U.S. Marine, so she doesn't necessarily need much saving. They both kind of need each other more than say kind of a Reacher riding in to save the girl and kill the bad guys. So I wanted to write more of a feminist bent on it, more of a kind of human story. I wanted to write these two damaged people kind of coming together over a dog, and in the process, ridding the town of its corrupt sheriff. And so for me, the joy of that series has been watching this dog who's based on my Lucy, which incidentally makes all the kibble and vet visits tax deductible now, which is key as a writer to look for tax breaks. But watching this dog bring these two kind of people together who I find quite compelling in an environment that speaks to me, because I'm based in Vancouver. I love the West Coast, and I was reading a lot of books where Southern geography, Southern noir, Daniel Woodrell, writers based in the Appalachians have written so evocatively about the geography and the kind of culture there, and I wanted to do something similar for my corner of the world, and so that's kind of how that book came about. And I really wrote it quite literally on walks with my Lucy. I'd think about passages that I wanted to write and scribble them, or type them into my phone and go back to my computer and write them quickly. And I hadn't really felt that urge to write quite as passionately in years, and so I wrote these scenes, and kind of out of order, not how I would normally write a book, and then started to link them together, and thought, well, if something comes of this, something comes of it. But if not, at least I know I still love writing and I still love storytelling, and I gave myself license to be a bit more kind of stylistically maybe indulgent or lyrical, or a bit more descriptive. There's a bit more romance, and I found it just really fulfilling and fun, and was able to get it in the hands of a dog-loving editor at Mulholland Books who put it out and put out a sequel, and hopefully there'll be more books in that series as well, because there's certainly more Lucy tales to be told, and there's no shortage of material for me with Mason Burke and Jess Winslow. I really I love going to Deception Cove in my head and exploring that culture.
Hey, Owen, I've got a question about from the stolen ones.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come across or decide you wanted to write about human trafficking? And then was there, much activity that came out of that? Like, oh, the people, it's like you don't really are aware that this kind of stuff goes on. I mean, you're a little bit naive, but it's like, is this based on real activities?
It is, yeah. Yeah, and thanks for that great question. The Stolen Ones is about human trafficking. It's about two sisters from Romania who wind up in a shipping container and are brought to the States, and it's in northern Minnesota, where one of the sisters manages to escape from the shipping container, the other doesn't. And so you have this kind of young woman who doesn't speak any English, stranded in northern Minnesota with a dead body and a container truck somewhere down the highway with her sister and a bunch of other women inside. And so the whole point of the novel is to try to save the women inside the container and get these sisters reunited. And I think with a lot of my books, especially in the Stevens and Windermere series, the kind of basic idea was, it comes about from kind of watching the news or seeing something that twinges something in me, that, here's an angle that I'd like to explore that maybe isn't as explored. And I remember reading a book about global crime, and one chapter was on human trafficking, and something that I've noticed, or certainly noticed then, was that a lot of the focus on human trafficking stories is about either the bad guys who are trafficking, or it's about the good guys who are stopping them. But there's not much acknowledgement or not much told from the voice of the human beings in the shipping container, the people who are actually being affected. And I think, where drug smuggling or gun smuggling or all of those things, the guns aren't talking, the drugs aren't talking, but with human trafficking, like, these are people being smuggled who got into that shipping container for a reason. They all have a story. They all have a past. They all had hopes and dreams. They all have fear. And so I wanted to write a story that gave some voice and agency to the people in the box. And so honestly, a lot of the Stevens and Windermere books, Stevens and Windermere are kind of they're the necessary function to tell the story that I want to tell, which is these human trafficking victims kind of being, I would say, ignored in a lot of ways by people who are telling the stories of these crimes. And for me, the heart of the story were Irina and her sister, who are kind of hoodwinked into this box, and then subjected to just terrible things, and have to survive and have to make the best of it. And so a lot of the kind of storytelling decisions in the book were about giving agency to these people. So to Irina and her sister. So it's not Stevens and Windermere saving the day. It's not, you know, American cops saving the day. It's these human beings with help from Stevens and Windermere, with help from the people here. But it's these sisters kind of getting control back and ultimately kind of getting justice. So that to me, I think a lot of writing crime fiction is, for me, is kind of trying to sneak in social commentary into an exciting story. I think one thing that someone said to me once is that you can use crime fiction or genre fiction of any kind to tell the stories you want to tell and get readership in a way that you can't necessarily by writing essays or literary fiction. And so for me, a story is important. The stories that I want to tell are stories that are based in issues that I want to talk about, or societal kind of ills or injustices that I want to cast a light on. And so that the Stolen Ones for me was based on that.
When you did go ahead, sorry.
Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Like sometimes you choose an issue that's just completely unpalatable and won't sell when packaged into a thriller form, and other times, you know, it can be, you know, it's possible to make it into a entertaining thriller. But either way, I don't want to write about just kind of malevolent bad guys who just grew up evil. I want to write about normal people who find themselves in awful situations and how they react to it, good or bad.
When you did research, did you have the opportunity to talk to people who had been trafficked?
I didn't firsthand. I did a lot of kind of research, reading stories online, reading accounts, and I would say that part of the research process for me is always really helpful, because I think especially writing crime fiction, you can look at the news and look at these kind of atrocities and look at these bad things that are happening and think like, wow, that would be a good story. My mom was a forensic pathologist, so she just has a wealth of kind of terrible murder stories that she's probably a bit jaded about. But so hearing kind of a good story idea and then sitting down to write it and research, you know, my kind of thought was, you know, human trafficking would be a good story. And then sitting down and reading accounts of people who were in shipping containers for weeks at a time, with other people crammed in, hot, stifling, dark, little to eat, like a waste bucket in the corner, and hearing about how they wind up there, hearing about the kind of just death and hardship and misery, it grounds you, I think, as a writer, where you're not then writing from a place of exploitation, because you don't want to exploit someone's terrible story for your own gain, where you're hopefully writing from a place of empathy. And so I find it quite challenging sometimes to read the background and do the background research on some of these things, but I think it's also really worthwhile, because I think the mark of a good writer and an effective writer is having empathy and maintaining that empathy. And so that a lot of times the research side of things does really hammer that part home.
Have any of your mom's experiences found their way into any of your books?
Not as many as, you know, I'd like to have more of my mom's stories are legendary. And because my folks are both doctors, the dinner time conversation at our house was just kind of uncensored, you know, any sort of kind of human viscera was. I remember going out to dinner with my mom on a beautiful summer day, sitting on a patio, and her kind of telling me that a few hundred yards away, she'd been there when they pulled a body from the river. And she remembered that everyone thought they'd been drowned, but she knew that they'd been strangled because the trachea was crushed. And I'm eating my bacon cheeseburger at the time, and everyone around us is kind of hearing us. and the waitress comes by and gives us a weird look, but my mom just happily can relate stuff like that just because, it's her line of work. But I certainly use her as a resource. Like if I'm asking about, what a body would look like after 3 months in a car in the northern Minnesota woods in the dead of summer, she will happily give me descriptions and ideas about how to describe it. So I certainly use her as a resource. I don't have I would say the kind of appetite for graphic blood or violence. So a lot of my mom's stories are kind of more murderous than I really want to write about it. I don't really want to write about a lot of blood and gore, but I will say one story of my mom's that I tell at readings all the time and that I want to put into a book somehow is the story that, when I was 6 or 7 and my brothers were 5, my mom was working nights on call and my dad was, he's a doctor as well. So he was in the hospital working, and my mom got called into this murder case where someone, and it was like your literal dark and stormy night. And she has 3 kind of kids under the age of 7 at home, but she has to go out. So she has to like scramble to find a babysitter. Well, she goes out into this storm to find this place where these body parts were found, severed hands and feet were found, on the side of a riverbank or on the beach or something. And so she drives out to this like park in the middle of nowhere, driving rain. She's like a young mother. There's no one around, but body parts have been found somewhere. So she's kind of wandering around the woods, and a cop like leaps out at her thinking she's the killer. It's like, what are you doing here? And she's like, I'm the doctor. I'm here to. So she has to piggyback on this cop's back through like a raging river in the dead of night in a storm to this beach where these body parts are, and kind of treks through the mud and ultimately gets there, kind of looks at these body parts, stands up and says, I'm going home. These are movie props. Take me back to my vehicle. So one of the few of my mom's stories that has a happy ending in that regard. But I always thought that was a good one. And the way that she tells it, having the cop leap out at her, having these kids at home, like, we were a pain in the ass. So I've always wanted to write more of her stories. She has a bunch of doozies, but certainly I'd like to write with her because she's an avid reader of crime fiction as well. So if, she could give some of those like Scarpetta a run for her money.
How about your young adult books?
Yeah, so my young adult books kind of came about. I've written 3. I wrote 2 under a pen name and then a third one that came out last year under my actual name. And it's been a process. I was writing a book a year in the Stevens and Windermere series, and I found myself with some extra time on my hands, and my agent suggested that I should write a young adult book. And I think this was around the time that there was a lot of money in young adult fiction, and people were writing Hunger Games knockoffs, and Divergent, I think, had just come out. And so there was a lot of money. And my agent, being my agent, was kind of eager to cash in on that. So I said, okay, I'll write a young adult book. And I hadn't really read much young adult fiction. And the book I wrote, it was as though, someone's well-meaning but clueless dad wrote a young adult book. It was very high on the moral stuff, like no partying, no mature content, nothing that would speak to today's youth. And I showed it to my agent, and she kind of politely shifted it aside, and without saying as much, kind of indicated that it wasn't going to be a hit. So I dusted off this thing that I wrote when I was 20, which was essentially the plot of Scarface, but told in a high school. And I found it and kind of tinkered with it and rewrote it and showed it to her. And this book is about 55,000 words, and the F word is used 260 times. There's rampant drug use. There's sex in all forms, partying beyond belief. And this book sold overnight in a 6-figure deal to a New York publisher. And I will say in its defense that it does have a strong moral background. The message is, I think, a good one. I just think that you can't pander to teenage readers, that teen readers are too smart to be pandered to, and you have to kind of hit them at their own level. I think, when I was a teenager, I was stealing my parents, or stealing, Dean Koontz books and Stephen King books and whatever we could get our hands on that was full of adult situations. So I do think that we're kind of naive if we think that teen readers aren't getting that kind of content. I think that we can kind of couch that with a kind of realistic depiction of what the consequences are for bad behavior. But I think trying to ignore that partying goes on and that people are having sexual relationships, I think it's just not a way to find readers, and it's not a way to get a message across that is a positive one. So I do stand by those books, even though they are kind of more mature. Like, I wouldn't recommend them for your 13 or 14-year-old, but for 16 and 17-year-olds, I think that I've had a lot of success with them. I think it's been really fun writing young adult fiction because I could be more stylistically brave than I am writing commercial adult thrillers. I think with teens, you can be clever. You can kind of break the fourth wall as a writer. Your goal as a writer is to make the reader feel as though they're in on a secret or something transgressive that only you and them share, and that their friends or their kind of people at school aren't sharing, or more importantly, adults aren't sharing. So if you can have a hint of kind of transgression, a hint of kind of breaking the rules, a hint of kind of conspiracy with the writer and the reader, and have more fun on the page, it's a different process than writing a book that a kind of business person is going to pick up at the Hudson News at the airport and want to keep them awake until the flight lands in New York. So for me, my kind of young adult fiction is a lot of kind of short chapters, a lot of kind of weird kind of author's notes and weird kind of almost prose poetry on the page, where it's written from a point where I have nothing to lose, and so I can just kind of write something fun that I think I would have liked as a reader. And for reluctant readers, the short chapters really work for teens who want to feel kind of a part of a conspiracy or a secret or something, or something that's kind of maybe not wholly adult approved. I think it works really well. And I also think that they still do kind of couch a solid message in the end. So my first 2 young adult books were written under a pen name, which was a weird process for me. And it was because the publisher of the Stevens and Windermere books wanted to protect the brand, the Owen Laukkanen brand, which is a weird and kind of obnoxious thing to even say. But so the publisher of the young adult books suggested a bunch of pen names, one of which was Luke Cannon, which struck me as either like a pro wrestler or like an adult film star. So I kiboshed that. And so then they came with Owen Matthews, which is my middle name, who is also kind of a writer. Owen Matthews also writes historical fiction set in Britain. And so I do get some confused emails from readers sometimes who wonder why this historical fiction writer suddenly has a bunch of teenagers in North America doing drugs and having sex and just essentially causing mayhem. But so those 2 books, the Owen Matthews books, kind of were the end of the Owen Matthews experience, and my most recent young adult novel, The Wild, came out under Owen Laukkanen. And this one is a story based on a person I knew who, when she was 17 or a teenager, she was in a lot of trouble at school. She had a drug problem. She had kind of dropped out of school and moved in with a 40-year-old man, and her parents were kind of at their wits' end, and they paid to have her kidnapped and flown to Utah, where she was marched around the desert with a bunch of other similarly kind of bad kids for 3 months until she was judged to have been cured of her wayward tendencies, which did not work at all. She came back just kind of bitter, I think, but and certainly kind of a lot of therapy later. She's on the right track now, but that struck me as A, like horrible in every way, but B, kind of an interesting story idea. And I thought, what would happen if things went wrong on one of these wilderness things? Because these are like kind of unsanctioned, unregulated boot camps for teens, where you have these kind of shady companies marching kids around in the wilderness for months on end, and that's kind of the perfect recipe for things to go awry. So the wild is what happens when something goes awry, and it's kind of a Lord of the Flies, Hunger Games type saga.
Because I follow you on Instagram, I saw a few weeks ago, maybe more, there was a young girl who realized that you were an author.
Mm-hmm.
And so she ran out and got your book and then read it. I was just wondering, prior to everything shutting down with COVID, I know you must have been doing a lot of book talks for adults, but did you get the opportunity to go and like meet a lot of your young adult readers as well?
I did, yeah, and it's so rewarding because I think young adults, teenagers are still so passionate about the things that they're passionate about. I mean, they just have this kind of enthusiasm that I think we sometimes lose. And so my sister-in-law is a librarian at a private girls' school in Toronto, so I've done talks there and met readers there, and kind of I've done a number of young adult library visits and talks, and I've also done these kind of mentorship programs with young writers, which I find just so immensely fulfilling and rewarding. Kind of taking a writer who's 12 or 13 and trying to kind of coach them one-on-one for a few months on a weekly basis, and together kind of coming up with a story, or even just kind of trying to impart kind of recommendations or stoke the enthusiasm, because I think it can be challenging when you get into any sort of creative endeavor as a career to keep that enthusiasm for the creative side of things. When your creative output becomes a product, it does lose some of the magic of creating. So being around people who are creating for the sake of creating, and particularly young folks who are just in love with storytelling, it's certainly just rejuvenating for me as a writer, and I'm always impressed by just how precocious and how intelligent and how advanced and ambitious and just wonderful kind of the kids that I interact with are. They wear their hearts on their sleeves. Boy, I had a student get in touch with me from California who I've never met, but they found me on Instagram, and they met their best friend because they both liked The Fixes, which is my second Owen Matthews book, and they had all sorts of questions and wanted to know if there was a sequel coming, and they were just so passionate about it. And then kind of I gave them what I could, and then a year later one of them wrote me back and said, hey, my friendship with this person is kind of dissipated, but I'll always be so grateful that your book brought us together for the time that it did. So thank you so much for that. And I still really like your stuff. And could you, if I buy a copy of your book, could you sign it for me? And so I just sent them a signed copy of the book, and they were just, beyond grateful. And then they wrote, they're in music theater. And so they wrote, I think for one of their like senior year projects, a musical theater version of The Fixes, or part of the scene of The Fixes. And so like stuff like that, and stuff like what you were saying, Stacy, where this volunteer at our shelter found out that I was a writer and went out and bought my book and read it in 2 days and was just so thrilled. that's what makes it kind of worthwhile. That's what the connections that you make, they keep you going through the rough patches. So I find that stuff just so immensely rewarding and gratifying and moving.
Did you have any favorite authors growing up or now?
Well, growing up, I really liked Steinbeck. I read a lot of Dean Koontz, I think, because it was kind of transgressive and violent and sexy, and Steinbeck was kind of what I read to be respectable, but I really liked his stuff. I kind of grew up wanting to write literary fiction, and kind of didn't because I think, when I went to school, my goal was to tell the trials and tribulations of the 20-something upper middle class white man, which I think is a voice that we can all agree needs to be amplified more in our current culture, especially kind of from a literary fiction point of view. I think there's a lot of kind of white men writing literary fiction about how hard it is to be a white man, and so I thought maybe writing crime fiction would be better. So I shelved the Steinbeck ideas, or the kind of literary fiction ideas. But for me right now, one of my favorite authors is Amor Towles, who wrote A Gentleman in Moscow and Rules of Civility. And his recent one is called The Lincoln Highway. And he's not a crime fiction writer. He writes literary fiction. But when people ask me for a book recommendation, A Gentleman in Moscow is my number one recommendation.
He's one of my favorites.
I absolutely love him. I did an event with Penguin Library people, and they gave me his first book, Rules of Civility, and said I would love it. And I let it sit on my shelf for a year because I thought it's a story about two sisters in New York in the 1940s. Like, why would I read this? Written by a Brooklyn lawyer. And then I read it and I was in love. And then his second book, A Gentleman in Moscow, just absolutely blew me away. And just kind of the language that he uses, the inventiveness, it's a delight. So that for me was that's the one that I always recommend. And then on the crime fiction side, I really like Don Winslow's writing a lot. He writes these kind of border trilogy books about the drug cartels. I like my friend Nick Petrie's stuff, the Peter Ash books. I'll always be reading those. I have a kind of soft spot for Craig Johnson, the Longmire books. I'm just looking at my shelf now to see what I brought with me. But yeah, my friend David Joy, I think David Joy, Brian Panowich, Daniel Woodrell, writers like that appeal very much. And I grew up on kind of Raymond Chandler and Ian Fleming, so I always kind of have a soft spot for those, even if Ian Fleming hasn't really aged so well. I think my dream as a writer would be to be one of the people who's hired to write the updated James Bond books, just because I think it'd be fun to go into that world. But
Question? Go ahead.
Oh,
Just
I don't really have a question. I just want to say I have enjoyed your books about Minnesota. Because
thank you.
I was wondering how much you came back. I just had read a little while ago, Kilfee, and I've done that same walk that you described in the beginning. So that was really fun to read because I could just picture everything in my head. So
Yeah.
do you come back a lot to, how do you do that when you come back and where to go for beginning?
I have friends in Minnesota now, who've been so gracious with their time. And that walk in Kilfee, I remember doing my first visit to St. Paul, or to the Twin Cities, and I remember it being just kind of a bright sunny day and walking with this new friend, and him showing me around and taking me to these kind of good lunch spots, these beautiful parks overlooking the river, and the peanut statues and stuff like that, and Summit Ave and all of those spots, and kind of me just trying to soak it all in. And now I try to get back. Typically, kind of, I'll go back on tour to Once Upon a Crime, with every new book. I haven't been able to go back for a couple of years, but really kind of definitely hoping to get back and explore more of the state. I've been up to Duluth, and I've been kind of through the state by car and by train, but certainly I'm an outdoorsy guy, and I feel like the kind of the northern part of Minnesota, as long as you bring kind of bug spray, I think would be lovely to spend a lot of time in.
Well.
Do we have any other questions for Owen before we let him go? He's been very kind to spend an hour with us already.
Oh,
so
geez, this time has flown by. I've been just so grateful to be here and talking to people.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. I really appreciate your books, and look forward to kind of reading some more that I wasn't even aware that you had written. So I will definitely check those out. But thank you very much, and good luck with those dogs.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for signing on and for your great questions.
All right. Well, thank you again. And definitely as I was mentioning to you yesterday, the books are still going out.
Awesome.
I think we only had one up on the front counter when I came in today. The rest are all still out. So thank you again for your time, and I don't know if anybody else has any questions. I can't see anybody. So thank you, and good luck with everything you've got coming up ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a real pleasure for me, and I hope to visit Lake City and the library in person next time.
Yes. Well, if I see that you're planning a trip to Minnesota. Oh, one of my people here said you need to put us in one of your books.
I will.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
I will make a tax deductible trip to Lake City, and then.
Sure. Sounds good.
We have a lake. You can use your mother's story.
Oh, perfect. There you go.
Yeah. Lake Pepin.
Perfect.
So.
Yeah. Awesome. Yes, I would love to. I will. And
All
when
right.
I do come, I will drop in, or we'll do one of these in person.
In person, that would be awesome. Great. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Stacy, and everyone for being here.
Bye.
Bye.